Okay, so good afternoon everyone. My name is Misty Joel Yabes and our group will be discussing to you yung ating chapter 10, yung some parts ng ating chapter 10 sa ating Micropara lecture, which is the disease and the bacteria and the disease. So here we will be discussing to you how organisms produce disease and the classifications of disease and the stages of our disease and yung ating chapter summary, yung whole summary ng ating chapter 10. So first, I will be discussing to you how organisms produce disease. So, ayan. So, paano nga ba napoproduce ang disease natin through our organisms? So, meron tayong tatlong ways, which is our MCI. So, ano nga ba ang ating MCI? M stands for mechanical, C stands for our chemical, at saka ang ating stands for immunologic. So, first, let's tackle the mechanical. So here, sa mechanical natin, under dito yung invasiveness. So here, organisms produce disease through damaging our tissues and our body surfaces directly. So here, it involves the invasion of the organisms to our epithelial surfaces, at saka ang kanilang penetration sa deeper tissues natin. So, dito sa ating mechanical, na under dito ang invasiveness, meron tayong tatlong types ng invasiveness. We have yung CAP. So, yung CAP natin stands for colonization, ability of our microorganisms or our invading organisms to evade our immune responses. And yung for our letter P is yung production ng extracellular substances. So next slide, let's talk about our colonization. So sa ating colonization, ang ating organisms or ang ating invading organisms is nag-e-enter sila sa ating susceptible host and wherein ine-establish nila yung self nila doon sa ating portal of entry. So here, paano nga ba ito na-produce? This is, or paano nga ba ito nangyayari? So, this is done by the substances produced by our organisms na nagfa-facilitate ng adhesion. So, ano nga ba yung mga tawag sa substances na nagfa-facilitate ng adhesion? So, ang tawag dito ay ang ating mga adhesins. So, yung ating adhesion kasi is tinutulungan niya ang ating microorganisms na mag-invade sa surfaces at mag-enter sa ating mga katawan easily. Mag-enter sa katawan ng susceptible host easily. So, here meron tayong to note. Okay, so ang ating mga gram-negative bacteria is nagpopossess sila ng ating pili or ang ating fimbriae, in which itong pili at saka ang ating fimbriae ay nagpro-promote ng adherence of the organism to the susceptible host or our susceptible cells. Gets ba? Okay. So, next is the ability to evade. Yung ability ng ating invading organisms to evade our host immune defenses. So, ganito kasi yan. Once na nag-enter na ang ating invading organisms sa ating body, yung immune system ng ating susceptible host is nagre-response siya. So, paano nga ba sila nagre-response? Nagre-response sila through activating ang ating immune responses para ma-invade yung mismong invading organism. However, ito kasi mga ating invading organism, medyo matatalino sila kasi nakakagawa sila ng mga mechanism para maka-escape sa mga ating immune responses. So, ano nga ba yung mga example dito? Meron tayong tatlong example. Number 1 is yung ating mga bacteria na nagpo-possess ng capsule in which itong mga capsule na to inaalaw niya ang ating microorganisms to invade our phagocytosis. So ano nga ba ang phagocytosis? Ang phagocytosis natin or ang phagocytosis is a process in which yung ating phagocytes ay nagsusurround at dinedestruct niya ang ating mga foreign substances. So, ano nga ba yung example ng bacteria na to? Ang example niya ay ang ating Streptococcus pneumoniae. Ang ating Streptococcus pneumoniae ay nag-possess ng capsule in which itong capsule na to, inaalaw niya ang ating organism para ma-invade ang phagocytosis. Okay? Next naman is meron tayong Staphylococcus aureus or ang Staphylococcus aureus kasi natin is nagsesecrete siya ng ating enzyme which we call coagulase, in which itong ating coagulase ay nagpo-promote siya ng formation ng ating coagulum. So, ang coagulum natin, ito yung nagsisilbing hiding spot ng ating mga invading organisms wherein dito sila nagtatago para ma-escape nila yung ating mga immune surveillance cells. Okay? Dito yun sa ating Staphylococcus aureus. Next naman ay ang ating Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Ito kasing ating Mycobacterium tuberculosis is nagmumultiply at nagsusurvive sila sa ating macrophages or macrophage. Sa ating macrophage by inhibiting our phagosome-lysosome fusion. Okay? So, yun yung ginagawa nila. Next naman, sa ating third type ng ating invasiveness, which is the production of extracellular substances. Dito, meron naman tayong dalawang example, which is, number 1 is yung ating Neisseria gonorrhoeae, in which nag-e-enter ito at nagmumultiply within our host cells, and after the multiplication is extruded from the host cells, ang nangyayari dito is inaalaw nito na maka-infect sa other pang host cells. Ito kasi ang process of extrusion from the host cells causes the destruction of the host cell mismo. Gets ba? Or ulitin ko. Okay. So, ang Neisseria gonorrhoeae kasi is nagmumultiply sila at nag-e-enter sila sa ating host cells, in which after that multiplication is extruded or forced out from the host cell, inaalaw nito ang pag-infect ng ating microorganism sa ating iba pang host cell. Gets ba yun? Okay, kasi ang process of extrusion from the host cell causes the destruction of the host cell. Okay? So, ang second example natin is ang ating Clostridium perfringens. So, ang ating Clostridium perfringens kasi ay nagpo-produce ng collagenase, in which itong collagenase initiates the breakdown of our collagens, in which kapag nabe-breakdown kasi ang collagens natin, nakaka-produce tayo or nagkukos ito ng disease which we call gas gangrene. Okay? So, ano ulit yung tatlong types ng ating invasiveness? We have CAP, in which colonization. Next is the ability of our microorganisms or our invading organisms na mag-evade sa ating immune responses. Third is the production of extracellular substances. Okay, so yun ay under sa ating mechanical. Next naman is yung sa ating chemical. Dito sa ating chemical kasi, na way, is under dito ang ating toxin production. Ang mga toxins kasi natin are poisonous substances that are often contributing to our disease production. Yung ating mga toxin, ito ay mga poisonous substances na nagko-contribute sa production ng ating diseases. So, meron tayong two types ng ating toxins, which are our endotoxins and our exotoxins. So, first, let's talk about our endotoxins. Ang endotoxins natin ay integral composition or component ng ating outer membrane ng mga gram-negative bacteria natin, kagaya ng Salmonella, Shigella, at saka Escherichia coli. Ang endotoxin natin, so paano ba nare-release ang ating endotoxin? Ang endotoxin natin ay nare-release kapag ang ating gram-negative bacteria ay namamatay at ang cell wall nila is undergoing lysis. So doon nagpro-produce or doon nare-release ang endotoxins. So ano nga ba ang main component na responsible dito sa ating endotoxins? Ang main component na responsible sa ating endotoxin ay ang ating lipopolysaccharide, which is, we can call it LPS din. Okay, so itong lipopolysaccharide is, responsible sa ating endotoxin activity of this bacteria. So, ang ating LPS or ang ating lipopolysaccharide ay na composed of lipid A moiety at saka ang ating polysaccharide moiety. Ano ulit yung dalawang nagko-compose sa ating lipopolysaccharide or ang ating LPS? First is our lipid A moiety and ang second ay ang ating polysaccharide moiety. So, ang ating lipid A moiety ay associated sa toxin activity. Ang ating polysaccharide moiety naman ay antigenic. So, bakit siya antigenic? Ito kasing ating polysaccharide moiety ay nagko-consist ng complex structure in which inaalaw nito ang ating immune system na ma-recognize siya as a foreign substance. So, yun siya. So, next, meron tayo ditong to note. Okay, all endotoxins produce similar signs and symptoms, pero different yung degrees. Okay, so yun lang yung nasa endotoxin. Next na tayo, we have our exotoxins. So ito, medyo marami yung nakapaloob dito or marami siyang subtopics. Medyo lang naman. So, ang ating ang ating exotoxins ay ang intracellular products ng ating bacteria as a part or na importante para sa kanilang growth at metabolism that are released into surrounding medium. Ang ating exotoxins ay nare-release sa surrounding medium. These are mainly proteins and many of them are enzymes. So, itong ating exotoxins ay naproproduce mostly ng ating mga gram-positive bacteria, but it may also be produced by some of our gram-negative bacteria. So, meron tayong tatlong characteristics ng exotoxins. Ang tatlong characteristics ng ating exotoxins ay soluble sila sa ating body fluids, easily diffuse sila sa ating blood, and last characteristic niya is easily or rapidly transported siya throughout our body. So, meron tayong tatlong principal types of exotoxins. First is the C, and second is the N, and third is the E. So, we have C and E. So, ang ating C and E stands for C, cytotoxins, N stands for our neurotoxins, and E stands for our enterotoxins. So, ang ating cytotoxins, it kills the host cells and affect their function. From the word cyto, di ba cell yun? Okay, so next, we have neurotoxins. From the word neuro, ini-interfere nito ang ating normal nerve impulse transmission. Third naman is our enterotoxins. Ang entero kasi is a Greek word, is a prefix ng Greek word natin which is yung enteron, which means intestine. So, itong ating enterotoxin ay ina-affect niya ang cell lining ng ating gastrointestinal tract. Okay? So next, under pa rin to sa ating exotoxins, yung mga disease na naiproproduce ng ating exotoxin-producing bacteria are due to the effects of exotoxin itself and not of the bacteria. So, exotoxins are disease-specific. So, meron tayong tatlong types ng exotoxin. Number 1 is D, number 2 is B, and number 3 is T. We have DBT. So, D stands for diphtheria toxin, B stands for our botulinum toxin, and T stands for our tetanus toxin. Okay? So, ano ulit ang dalawang types ng ating toxin? We have our endotoxin at saka ang ating exotoxin. So, ang ating exotoxin ay meron siyang tatlong principles or principal type, which are our C and E. Ang C is cytotoxin, ang N is neurotoxin, at ang E is enterotoxin. Okay? So, next na tayo. Dito tayo sa ating table. Dito i-compare natin ang ating endotoxin at ang ating exotoxin depending on these properties. So, first, the bacterial source. So, ang ating endotoxin ay mainly sa gram-negative bacteria lang. Wherein ang ating exotoxin ay mostly sa gram-positive pero pwede rin silang ma-produce ng ating gram-negative bacteria. Sa microorganisms naman, ang endotoxin is present in LPS or our lipopolysaccharide of the outer membrane. Nare-release ito through lysis and the cell wall lysis. Actually, ulit nga, ang ating endotoxin is nare-release siya kapag namamatay na ang ating gram-negative bacteria at ang pag-lysis or kapag yung cell wall is nag-undergo na ng lysis. Tapos, ang ating exotoxin naman is a metabolic product of growing cell na nase-secrete outside naman ng ating cell. So, in terms naman sa ating toxicity, mas toxic ang ating exotoxin kasi pwede din siyang maging fatal, and ang ating endotoxin ay weakly toxic naman siya kesa sa ating exotoxin. So, dito naman sa chemistry, dito sa endotoxin, meron tayong lipid A of lipopolysaccharide of our outer membrane. And dito naman sa ating exotoxin ay meron tayong protein or short peptides. Dito naman sa effect ng body natin or effect sa body natin, ang endotoxin ay nagge-generate ng fever, malaise, and shock, and all produce the same effects. Next naman is ang ating exotoxin, in which ito ay specific sa ating particular cell structures or functions in the host. Mainly, inaapektuhan nito ang ating cell functions, ang nerve, at ang ating GIT or ang gastrointestinal tract. Okay, so next naman is sa antigenicity. We have the endotoxin being less antigenic, and our exotoxin being extremely antigenic. Okay, for our table number 2, yung sa kanilang enzymatic activity naman, ayan. Next naman is sa ating heat stability, in which ang ating endotoxin daw ay heat stable and ang ating exotoxin ay heat labile or heat unstable, except our staphylococcal enterotoxin. So, sa ating fever production, sinasabi nila dito, ang ating endotoxin ay nagproproduce ng fever and ang ating exotoxin ay hindi nagproproduce ng fever. So, dito naman tayo sa degree nila. Ang endotoxin daw natin ay low degree and ang ating exotoxin ay high degree. Dito naman is sa relation to antibiotics or antibiotics. Ang endotoxin natin, it cannot be converted to toxoids and not neutralized by our antitoxins. Tapos, ang ating exotoxin naman can be converted to toxoids and can be neutralized by our antitoxins. Next naman is sa denaturation on boiling. Ang ating endotoxin ay hindi na denaturate on boiling and ang ating exotoxin naman ay denaturate siya on boiling. So, dito naman tayo sa locations. Ang ating endotoxin ay makikita natin sa ating bacterial chromosome, wherein ang ating exotoxin naman ay makikita natin sa plasmids or our bacteriophages. Okay? Sa representative diseases naman, ang ating endotoxin ay may produce ng typhoid fever, urinary tract infections, meningococcal meningitis, and meningococema. Ang ating exotoxin naman ay nagproproduce ng disease na gas gangrene, botulism, diphtheria, tetanus, at saka ng ating scarlet fever. Okay, so yun lang naman yung under sa ating chemical ways. Okay, so next naman, we have the immunologic. Diba meron tayong CMI. So, nandito na tayo sa last part, which is yung ating I, which stands for immunologic. So, dito kasi, organisms produce disease not as a consequence of that mechanical invasion or toxin production, but as a consequence ng ating immune responses, ng ating host cells to the microorganisms. Ang example natin dyan ay ang ating hepatitis. Ang hepatitis kasi natin ay caused by the virus of hepatitis viruses or hepatitis viruses. So ito, yung damage sa liver natin is hindi siya cause ng ating mismong hepatitis viruses. But instead, it is the cause or the consequence of the immune response na binabato natin sa ating hepatitis viruses. So dito kasi, yung antibodies are produced against the virus and cytotoxic T cells are activated leading to the destruction of hepatocytes. Okay? So yun yung nangyayari sa ating hepatitis. So next naman is yung ating childhood measles and German measles. So yung rashes na nakikita nyo sa mga measles na to are due to the specific immune response ng ating host cells sa ating measles viruses at hindi siya due sa mismong measles viruses. Uulitin ko po, ang immunologic, yung mga naproproduce ng organisms natin na disease ay hindi siya galing or hindi siya cause ng mismong viruses but cause siya ng mga immune responses na binabato natin dito sa ating mga viruses. Okay? So, yun lang naman yung nasa immunologic. So, ulitin natin, ano ulit yung tatlong ways kung paano kung paano nag-i-spread or kung paano nagpro-produce ng disease ang ating organisms. Meron tayong tatlo. We have C, M, and I. We have MCI pala. We have MCI, mechanical. Ang nasa mechanical natin ay invasiveness. Meron tayong tatlong types ng invasiveness, which are colonization, yung cup natin, colonization, ability of the microorganisms or our invading organisms to evade our immune responses. Tapos yung P natin, which is the production or the ability of our microorganisms to produce our extracellular substances. Okay? So, next naman is a chemical in which under dito ang ating toxic or toxin productions. So, meron tayong two types ng ating toxic or toxin ng ating toxins, 'di ba? Meron tayong 2 types ng toxins. Ano yung 2 types na yon? Meron tayong endotoxin at saka meron tayong exotoxin. Dito sa ating exotoxin, 'di ba, meron tayong 3 principal types niya. Ano yung 3 principal types? Meron tayong C and E. C stands for our cytotoxin, N stands for our neurotoxin, at saka ang ating E stands for enterotoxin. So last naman is our immunologic. So dito sa immunologic, 'di ba, meron tayong dalawang examples sa ating hepatitis at saka ang childhood measles and German measles. So yun lang naman yung tatlong ways on how diseases are produced by our microorganisms. So next naman na i-discuss is yung classification of the diseases, which will be discussed by Pauline Miguel and Joyce Navarro. Thank you.
Okay, so let's now move on to the classification of infectious diseases. So, infectious diseases are classified for us to better understand and to make easier for us to understand and analyze such as different infectious diseases. So, they are classified into basing on how they behave within a host and within a given population, based on the source of the microorganism, based on the occurrence of a disease, based on the severity or duration of a disease, and also lastly, based on the extent of host involvement. So, upon basing on how they behave within a host and within a given population, they are classified into communicable disease, contagious disease, fulminant infection, and also a non-communicable disease. So before we move on, let's think first let's recall first what are the four classification of infectious disease basing on how they behave within a host and within a given population. First, okay, so let's now move on. So, when we say communicable disease, a disease that is spread from one host to another, either directly or indirectly. So, when we say communicable disease, ito yung mga disease na kung saan nag-i-spread siya through the help or through one host to another person. So, example of these are the measles, tuberculosis, typhoid fever, and another simple example of this is yung ubo at sipon natin. Next is we have the contagious disease, a disease that easily rapidly spread from one person to another. So, ito naman yung mga disease na kung saan mabilisan siyang pag-spread from one person to another person or more. Examples are the measles and the chickenpox. Okay, so next, we have here the fulminant infection, where if the infection result in the death of a patient over a short period of time. So, ito naman yung disease na na-classify. So, ito yung mga disease na kung saan in a short period of time, pwedeng mabawian yung pasyente. So, example, if this is the meningitis coccemia, and lastly, infectious diseases are also classified as a non-communicable disease. Of course, if we have a communicable disease, we also have a non-communicable disease. So, ito lang naman is yung kabaliktaran siya ng communicable disease. So, when we say non-communicable disease, it is a disease that does not spread from one person to another. It usually goes by organism that occasionally or by organism that produce disease only when introduced into the body. So, ito naman yung mga, yung mga communicable disease, ito yung mga nakukuha natin through another person, or yung disease name is nag-i-spread through one person to another person. While sa non-communicable disease, ito naman yung mga hindi siya nag-i-spread or hindi siya galing sa ibang tao papunta sa kabilang tao. Well, instead of, ito yung mga organism or some virus or bacteria na kung saan nai-inhabit natin. And once na-inhabit natin yun, sa loob lang siya ng body natin siya magproproduce or magiging disease. So, example is the Clostridium tetani, or another example is like yung cancer. So, next is we have based based on the source of the microorganism, they are classified into two. You have the exogenous and the endogenous infection. So let's recall first what are the classifications of infectious diseases basing on the source of the microorganism. First, second. Okay. Okay, so let's now move on. So when we say exogenous, if the source of the infection agent is from outside of the body. So ito yung nakukuha natin sa labas ng ating katawan. Tapos, hospital-acquired infection or nosocomial infection can also be considered as exogenous infection, where the offending organism was obtained from the hospital environment during the period or confinement of a patient in the hospital. So, ito yung so example of this is the cholera. Or another example is like yung colds. Since yung cold is, yung source niya is sa labas ng body natin. At saka, atong cold na to, once na parang na-confine tayo sa isang hospital, once na-confine tayo sa hospital, tapos, sa hospital na yun, parang hindi, may isang bagay na hindi na-disinfect, tapos may parang virus or organism siya ng colds. Tapos once na parang may contact tayo dun or nahawakan or something else, maaari nating makuha yon. And that is classified as the exogenous. Because next we have the endogenous infection, is one where the source of the causative organism is from inside the body. Example is the Escherichia coli. This can lead to the development of urinary tract infection, which can ascend to involve the kidney and can lead to sepsis in immunocompromised patient. So, ito naman is like yung source niya is galing sa loob ng ating body. Kabaliktaran lang rin siya sa exogenous. So, for example naman ito. Another example is the cancer. Like, for example, yung cancer. Since yung cancer is hindi siya source through outside of the body. Ato yung source, ang source ng cancer is parang sa inside ng ating body. Kasi sa loob siya ng body natin, doon lang siya nagiging disease. So next is let's move on to the based on the occurrence of a disease. So we have 4 classification based on the occurrence of a disease. We have the sporadic disease, endemic disease, epidemic, and lastly the pandemic. So before we move on, let's recall what are the 4 classification based on the occurrence of disease and the pandemic. Okay, so let's now move on. When we say sporadic disease, a disease that occur occasionally if the disease is constantly present in a population at a low level. So sporadic disease naman is ito yung disease na it pops out with no reason or it pops out of nowhere or without any reason nagkakaroon ka nito. Or parang occasionally siya dumadating or without any reason dumadating na lang siya bigla. This once naman na itong disease na to is present in a low level of a population, it is called the endemic disease. So example are the malaria and schistosomiasis. So next is about the epidemic. If a great number of people in a given locality develop an infectious disease in a relative short period of time. So ito naman yung parang pagdami or in a great number of people sa isang locality is nagkakaroon ng disease na ito. So, example is the influenza and another example is yung Ebola. Since yung Ebola is nasa isang locality lang siya, and hindi siya nag-spread through the whole world, but instead sa isang locality lang siya and a number of people lang siya. Pero a great number of people sa isang locality lang siya. This next is pandemic. If a disease has a worldwide occurrence involves at least three region regionism the world region in the world. So ito naman is yung um, disease na kung saan buong bansa na siya nag-i-spread. So, example, this is the SARS and AIDS. And another example is yung COVID. Since yung COVID is hindi lang siya sa China noon na nangyari or hindi lang sa China siya nag-spread kundi sa buong mundo, including the Philippines, America, and another region in the world.
In this presentation, I will discuss the classification of infectious diseases based on their severity and duration. This classification helps us to understand how diseases develop and their potential impact on health. So we have three diseases: acute diseases, chronic diseases, and latent diseases. So let's start with acute diseases. An acute disease is characterized by a rapid onset and a short duration. For example, the common cold is an acute illness that can develop quickly, often resolving within a week or two. Its symptoms may be bothersome, but they are generally self-limiting. Second, chronic diseases develop more slowly and can last for an extended period, often for months or years. An example of this is tuberculosis. This disease progresses gradually and can remain in the body for a long time, requiring extensive treatment and management. And lastly, let's talk about latent diseases. These conditions are unique because the cohesive organisms remain inactive for a prolonged period. However, they have the potential to reactivate, leading to the manifestation of symptoms. Shingles is a classic example where the virus that causes chickenpox can remain dominant in the body and reactivate later in life, causing painful rashes. In this segment, I will discuss how infection can be classified based on the extent to which the host body is affected. This classification is important for understanding how infections spread and their potential impact on health. In this segment, I will discuss how infections can be classified based on the extent to which the host body is affected. This classification is important for understanding how infections spread and their potential impact on health. So we have five infections: localized infections, systematic infections, focal infections, primary infections, and subclinical infections. So let's start with localized infections. These infections are confined to a relatively small area of the body. Examples include boil and abscesses, where the invading organisms are limited to a specific site, causing localized inflammation and discomfort. Second, we have systematic or generalized infection. These occur when the causative organism or their products spread throughout the body, typically through the bloodstream or lymphatic system. This type of infection can affect multiple organs and systems, leading to widespread symptoms and requiring prompt medical attention. Now, let's talk about focal infection. These occur when the agents of localized infection enter the bloodstream or lymphatic vessels and spread to the specific areas of the body. The infections remain confined but affect specific region. For example, infections teeth, tonsil, or sinuses maaari ding kumalat sa iba't ibang bahagi ng katawan at magdulot ng matinding komplikasyon. Primary and secondary infections. Moving on, we differentiate between primary and secondary infections. A primary infection is an acute infection that causes the initial illness. Conversely, a secondary infection arises from opportunistic pathogens that take advantage of a weakened immune system following the primary infection. For example, secondary infections are common in immunocompromised patients such as those with AIDS, who may develop additional infections due to their compromised immunity. Lastly, we have subclinical or inapparent infections. These infections do not cause noticeable illness or symptoms, making them challenging to detect. Ito yung mga sakit na mahirap alamin. An example is hepatitis A, which can occur without the typical symptoms associated with the disease.
And now we'll discuss the 5 stages of an infectious disease. So, the first period is incubation, second, prodromal period, third, period of illness, fourth, period of decline, and lastly, period of convalescence. Sa first na period natin, which is incubation period, the time interval between the entry of the offending agent and the appearance of the initial signs and symptoms of the disease. The length of this period can be affected by the virulence of the organisms as well as the number of the infecting microorganisms. It also depends on the resistance of the host. So, during this period, ito yung entry ng infectious agent. Yung person na to is hindi pa siya aware. Kasi wala pa itong symptoms or signs. And habang nasa loob yung infectious agent na to is nag-multiply na siya at nag-establish. Yung duration naman dito is nakadepende sa dahilan ng resistance of the host. Pero yung usually na duration dito is 6 to 12 days. Next period is the prodromal period. This stage is characterized by the emergence of non-specific symptoms, often mild symptoms, such as fatigue, headaches, and general malaise. These early symptoms may not be readily identifiable as signs of a specific disease, but they indicate the body's initial response to the infection. So, during this period naman is ito yung emergence ng non-specific na symptoms. Mild lang siya. Ganon yung mga fatigue, headaches, and malaise. And ito yung mga symptoms pero hindi siya specific kasi nakikita niya siya sa mga ibang disease. Hindi lang siya nakikita sa measles. Next is period of illness. During this period, that the disease is most acute. This is the stage where a person feels the typical signs and symptoms associated with the disease. Example, the period of illness in measles is marked by appearance of the typical rashes seen in measles. Several outcomes can arise during this period. So, during this period naman, ito yung peak of the infection where the host experienced the characteristic symptoms of the disease. The severity of symptoms can vary widely, ranging from mild to life-threatening. It depends on the resistance ng host. Next is the fourth stage, the period of decline. Corresponds to what is known as period of defervescence. During this period, the patient's symptoms fade, body temperature returns to normal, and their weakness may decrease. So, yung period naman na to is ito na yung nag-fade na yung symptoms at parang bumabalik na siya sa normal na condition. And lastly, the period of convalescence. This period is marked by a recovery of the patient from the disease. The patient regains strength and the body returns to the prediscased normal condition. So, yung period naman na to, ito na yung pinaka-last. Ito na yung recovery ng pasyente. Bumalik na ito sa normal na condition. So, next is the table of the stages. First is the incubation period. Basta yung tandaan lang dito is no sign or symptoms. Next, prodromal period. Ito yung non-specific na symptoms. Next, illness. Ito yung most severe na signs. Ito na yung pinaka-specific na sign ng disease. Next, decline. Ito na yung bumabalik na siya sa normal na condition. Lastly, convalescence. Ito na yung nakabalik na siya sa normal na condition. There is no sign or symptoms.
Now for the chapter summary. Robert Koch was the first to scientifically prove that a specific infectious disease is caused by a specific infectious agent. Together with some colleagues, they experimentally provided evidence for this in what is now known as the cause postulate. Now moving on to the chain of infection. The chain of infection involves the following element: reservoir, portal of exit, mode of transmission, and host. The first element is the reservoir. The reservoir is the site where the organism resides and multiplies, provide an element conducive to the growth and replication of the organism. Reservoirs provide the continual source of infectious disease and may be humans, animals, or the environment. In other words, isipin nyo lang na ito yung home ng germs organisms. The second element is the portal of exit. A portal of exit refers to where the organism exits from its reservoir. For example, yung mga organs ng mga tao at hayop, dun sila nag-exit, kagaya ng mouth, nose, eyes, mga sugat, mga open na wounds, or genitals. Dun sila nag-exit. The third element is the mode of transmission. Mode of transmission refers to how the organism spreads. It generally classified into two transmissions: direct and indirect transmission. Indirect transmission includes airborne transmission, vector transmission, and vehicle transmission. For example, yung taong may sakit, nalagyan ng germs yung isang physical na object, tapos yung physical object na yun, nagkaroon ka ng physical contact, or nahawakan mo siya, yun ang indirect transmission. For the direct contact transmission, this is through person-to-person contact and through droplet transmission. Dito naman yung pwedeng example na matake mo is yung physical talaga siya. Kunwari yung kaibigan mong nakatching, tapos yung katugkitan na yun napunta sa'yo, yun ang tawag na direct transmission. And the last element is the host. The final link in the chain of transmission is a substical host. The development of infection in the host is affected by several factors such as genetic constitution of the host, the nature of the organism, and the immune status of the host. The most important among these factors is the defensive power of the host. Dito na lang, yung isipin nyo na lang sa host is yung mga target ng organisms or ng germs para ma-infect. Now moving on sa bacteria production. Bacteria produce disease in three main ways: mechanical, through invasion; chemical, through toxin production; and immunological. The first way is the invasion. Invasion involves adhesion to the mucosal surface and penetrates into deeper tissues. It is facilitated by structures found in the external surface of certain bacteria, as well as extracellular substance secreted by the bacteria to promote adhesion. So, ito yung first move ng bacteria na pumasok sa katawan natin para ma-infect at mag-spread. Tapos, the second way naman is the chemical. Bacteria produce toxins that may cause damage to the cells or affect the normal physiologic function of the host. These are generally classified into exotoxins, endotoxins. Kung ito naman, yung chemicals, kung ang cell ay building blocks of life sa atin, sa mga humans or basta yun, sa bacteria naman, ang building blocks nila ay chemicals. Endotoxins. Endotoxins are components of the outer membrane of gram-negative bacteria. There are mainly lipopolysaccharides composed of a lipid component and polysaccharides. The endotoxin naman, the endotoxin is the activity attributed to the lipid component. So, Ang isipin mo na lang pagdating sa endotoxin, sila yung parang lysosome ng cell ng bakterya. Sila yung sumasabog pagka masisira na or nasira na yung cell. Ay, yung bacteria cell do. Exotoxins are substances which are secreted by the bacteria. They are mainly produced by gram-positive bacteria but may also be produced by some negative bacteria. Tapos sa exotoxins naman, kung sa endotoxins, sila yung parang suicide bugs ng bacteria. Sa exotoxins naman, sila yung weapon ng bacteria. Ito yung ginagamit nila ng bacteria para ma-attack yung host at ma-harm ito. Yung third way ng production of the bacteria is the immunological. In some infectious caused by the microorganism, the damage to the host tissue is not a direct effect of the infecting agent, but is a consequence of the body's immune system response to the organism. Ang magiging example niya dito is kung paano nag-react yung bacteria dun sa immune system ng isang tao at kung paano niya na-overcome yun ang immunological. And that's all for my part sa chapter summary. I will be passing it to you, Clifford Bacani, to explain the rest.
Thank you, John Ray. So, infectious diseases are classified based on these following. So, first, how they behave within a host and within a given population. So, pag-ugali sa loob ng host at populasyon natin. Paano kumilos ang sakit sa loob ng katawan at komunidad natin. So, and second, the source of microorganism. Pinagmulan, saan nagmumula ang microbio. Sa mga hayop, sa tao, o sa kapaligiran natin. And third is the occurrence of disease, pagkakataon ng sakit, kung paano at kailan lumilitaw ang sakit, kabilang ang epidemya or pandemya. And fourth is the severity of duration of disease. Duration, tindi o tagal ng sakit, ang kalubuhan, ang sintomas, at kung gaano katagal ito tumatagal. Acute ba siya or chronic? So, and lastly, fifth is the extent host involvement, saklaw ng pagkakasangkot ng host. Kung gaano karaming tao o populasyon ang naapektuhan ng sakit. Infectious disease may be divided into 5 stages. So, first, we have incubation period. So, second is prodromal period. And third is we have period of illness. And fourth is period of decline. And lastly is period of convalescence. Incubation period corresponds to the time from initial entry of the infectious agents until the time the patient first manifests signs and symptoms. In this period, no signs or symptoms. Di pa siya aware kasi wala pa siyang symptoms, pero number of pathogens increase, nag-i-spread na siya dito. So, 2 is prodromal period, corresponds to the initial manifestation of the patients. These manifestations are usually non-specific constitutional symptoms such as fever, body, malaise, cough, and cold. Verge general symptoms. In this period, dito na siya nagkakaroon ng symptoms. Symptoms is not specific and hindi pa siya severe na symptoms. And mild pa lang siya. For example, fever, malaise, cold. And next is, the third one is the period where there is maximal invasion by the infecting agent. In this period is of illness. It is during this period where the signs and symptoms characteristic of this disease are seen. This period also known as the most severe signs and symptoms. And this period is acute stage. Yeah. So the fourth one is the decline phase. It is the period when the manifestation of the patient is diminished. It is also known as the patient of defervescence. The declining signs and symptoms. When the person's symptoms decrease but the person is still ill, number of pathogens decrease, bumabalik na siya sa normal dito. So, next one is lastly, fifth, the period of covalence. It is also known as the recovery period when the patients already become asymptomatic and the body returns to the normal pre-disease state. No sign of symptoms.